Hey, it's me, Paige. I'm going to be talking about the system where I work, the Health and Human Services Department in Yamhill County, Oregon, and we're going to call this department HHS. So, Yamhill County is a rural county about 15 miles outside of Portland. It's famous to tourists because it has wineries and vineyards and it's gorgeous. But that's just what the tourists see. Yamhill County actually has a pretty distinct split between folks with money and folks with less money. So, where the people with money live, it looks like this. Super pretty, right? It also looks like this. Where the folks without money live, it's cute, but it looks different. It looks like this. And the disparity between income levels in Yamhill County, it's pretty intense. So for this presentation, I'm going to talk about the population that we serve at HHS, which is folks who live in towns like this, and this is actually the town of Yamhill. And these folks are generally white, generally have a middle or high school education, have complex trauma histories, receive Medicaid, and are engaged in multiple social services around the county. So I work with clients out of our Newburgh office, which looks like this beautiful government building. And HHS actually has a bunch of offices throughout Yamhill County. It's decent size. It's a public government system with about 332 employees. And they talk about their values as a healthcare system, and it's really funny because they promote a value of diversity when the composition of the leadership does not reflect that value at all. Most of our HHS leadership are cis, heterosexual, white men and women. The only diversity we could even find there is that there are cis women. So there's not a lot of diversity anyways, and when we do see it, it's really stratified by power. So the people in higher paid positions are generally white, the people in lower paid positions are generally Latinx, and it's super easy to say that Yamhill County is not culturally responsive pretty much at all. So that leads us to my change goal, which is for Yamhill County to become culturally responsive to, you guessed it, queer people. HHS has so many queer clients. Queer people are disproportionately impacted by mental health challenges because of oppression. So we have a disproportionate amount of queer clients at the agency. We also have a disproportionately low amount of providers who are trained to serve queer clients. So that leads to my change goal, which is to create a requirement for training once a year, an LGBTQ training once a year for all therapists at HHS. So every year, each person has to take at least LGBTQ 101, but hopefully more higher level trainings as the years go on. So is one annual LGBTQ training enough to serve queer clients well? No, not even close. But it's a good start, and it would help us create not only a workforce of therapists who understand at least basic queer issues, but it might also normalize queer affirmation throughout the agency. When leadership's like, hey, we need queer trainings, maybe employees will be like, oh, cool, yeah, we should care about queer people. So to talk about who this would actually benefit, what am I talking about when I say queer clients? So the queer clients at HHS are queer and or trans, a lot of times both, white, rural, using Medicaid, and generally experiencing poverty. So when I advocate for these groups, my most relevant identities are that I'm queer and gender nonconforming. So those two identities are absolutely up front when I'm serving and advocating for our queer clients at HHS. And they're up front because with those clients, I'm advocating from a place of community, not a place of advocating for a community that I don't belong to or understand. The catch is queerness is not my only identity. And if I look through an intersectional lens, then I have to talk about the other identities that impact this dynamic as well. So I might be queer and white like my clients, but I also have wealth privilege. I have an education privilege. I'm in this program. I live in a progressive city. I have a family that affirms me and always has. So other than being queer and white, the rest of my identities don't actually intersect with my clients. And that's important to talk about because if I don't keep my privilege in check, then I can develop a savior mentality, like saving the rural people, which is an awful mentality. And I keep that in check by getting constant supervision every week and just really keeping a pulse on the power and privilege dynamics all the time. So that's who I am. In terms of what we're going to build, from a systems perspective, the primary measurement of success is, do we accomplish the goal? Does every mental health provider receive at least one LGBTQ training annually? even farther measures of success if people have extra trainings about queer culture, like Queer 201. But that baseline measure of success is going to be, does every therapist receive at least a basic LGBTQ training? Now, the problem is, to implement this training above the surface, we have a lot of elements below the surface that really need attention, because if we do trainings just as like a mandatory requirement, but we don't work to shift the underlying culture as queer affirming, people are just going to be like, cool, I did the training, I don't care, I'm not going to apply it, no one's holding me accountable, but I did the training. So I made an iceberg to show what this looks like. So in this iceberg, you can see above the surface, we have advocacy for queer trainings, but underneath the surface, we have employees who are debating whether or not we need EDI trainings or queer trainings. We have counselors who don't know much about queer issues. We have policies and procedures that are not queer inclusive. We have leadership and supervisors that are not queer and not trained in queer issues. We have a really small amount of LGBTQ staff. I'm one of 3 out queer employees out of the 332 HHS employees that I know about. Underneath that, we have my own mental models of, I'm like, can this even happen? I'm scared that it can't happen. I've had a lot of past experiences that show me that this might not happen. But I also have the mental models of believing that queers deserve access to affirming healthcare. And hopefully, and usually, that mental model should win out. And that leads me to what I learned in this process. So what I learned in this process is that my mental model of being scared to fail because of the anti-queer culture in Yamhill County and in rural mental health is strong. I'm really scared that this is impossible. We had one of our commissioners say publicly last year that EDI trainings are shaming for Caucasians. So there's a culture among my bosses, there's a culture among my coworkers that diversity trainings and queer trainings are not important. And so that really gives me this mental model of like, I'm going to fail, why try this? But luckily, I have other mental models I can kind of borrow from my privilege, borrow from my family, borrow from my resilience, borrow from my queer friends in Portland, and know that change is definitely possible, even if the system is super hard and super anti-queer. The thing I learned the most from this process is that belief can't win out. The belief that has to win out is queer people are resilient, queer people deserve affirming healthcare, and I can hold both to be true at the same time. We're oppressed as a community, and we look for connection and resilience to make change and not stop making change for as long as we exist. So that's what I got. Thanks for listening.